Good evening, and welcome to the Institute of Politics. My name is Nancy Katz. I am an Associate Professor of Public Policy here at the Kennedy School of Government, and I am delighted to have the honor of introducing our special guest tonight. Joining me on the podium is David Gergen, Professor of Public Service and Director of the Center for Public Leadership. Professor Gergen will moderate the discussion part of our program. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Center for Public Leadership, the KSG Republican Caucus, the KSG Jewish Caucus, the HBS Republican Club, and Harvard Students for Israel. In recent months, indeed even in the last few days, we have witnessed historic events. Events that people doubted we would ever see. Elections in Afghanistan, elections in Ukraine, elections in Iraq. At the start of this week, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice had meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Sharon and Palestinian Prime Minister Abbas to discuss how to bring about a free and democratic Palestinian state. On Tuesday, Mr. Sharon and Mr. Abbas signed a ceasefire agreement. We watched these events with bated breath. These recent developments reinforce President Bush's bold international agenda and his conviction that freedom, democracy, peace, and security are intertwined. The president has said that no one articulates this vision better than our honored guest tonight, Minister Natan Sharansky. In his new book, The Case for Democracy, The Power of Freedom to Overcome Tyranny and Terror, Minister Sharansky argues with passion and with eloquence that everyone, regardless of culture or national origin, deserves to be free. Minister Sharansky proposes the town square test as the measure of a free society. In her recent confirmation testimony before Congress, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice cited this test as a standard that the U.S. should strive to foster internationally. In The Case for Democracy, Minister Sharansky writes with a credibility and a power that are rooted in personal experience. Indeed, Natan Sharansky is singularly well qualified to appreciate the value of democratic freedoms. In the Soviet Union, citizen Sharansky fought tirelessly on behalf of the human rights of Jews, Pentecostals, Catholics, Ukrainians, and other dissidents. As a result of his courageous efforts, citizen Sharansky was imprisoned in the Gulag for 8 years. He withstood deprivation and isolation, long stretches of solitary confinement, and grueling interrogations. Despite the regime's efforts to crush his spirit, Mr. Sharansky maintained his ideals and integrity and turned his imprisonment into a process of spiritual liberation. Intense diplomatic efforts and public outcries for his release were unsuccessful until 1986, when he was freed in a prisoner exchange with the West. On the day of his release, Mr. Sharansky walked alone across the Glienicke Bridge from East to West Germany. He was ordered to walk in a straight line, but in a final act of symbolic defiance, he zigzagged across the bridge. Though his walk to freedom zigzagged, Mr. Sharansky's political beliefs and his commitment to promoting democracy have been consistent and unwavering. In Israel, he founded the Yisrael Ba'aliyah Party on behalf of Russian immigrants. He has served several governments in the roles of Minister of Industry and Trade, Minister of the Interior, Minister of Housing and Construction, Deputy Prime Minister, and currently Minister for Jerusalem and Diaspora Affairs. Minister Sharansky's influence continues to extend far beyond the frontiers of his own nation. As a champion of human rights, a voice of moral clarity, and a leader of the Jewish people, Minister Sharansky is destined to have a global impact. We are so fortunate to have such a special guest tonight. Please join me in welcoming Minister Natan Sharansky.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, and the comrades in arms in the struggle for Soviet Jewry, I see some of them at least. My book, The Case for Democracy, is dedicated to Andrei Sakharov. In fact, my visit here is partially connected with the fact that Harvard University just now became the home for archives of Andrei Sakharov. And Andrei Sakharov was the person, the scientist, who invented non-conventional weapons, hydrogen bomb in the Soviet Union, hoping, and he was a very, very young scientist then, hoping that that will be his contribution to the stability and security in the world. And when some years later, he understood that it doesn't work. He understood that it is dictatorial system of Soviet Union which endangers the security and stability of the world. He invented another weapon, which happened to be a non-conventional weapon for the Soviet Union. It was the word of truth. And he, with the help of this weapon, he destroyed Soviet Union. And in our book, the book which I wrote with my co-author, Ron Dermer, we wanted, in fact, to say that, yes, the free world knows very well how dangerous is the weapons of mass destruction in the hands of terrorists. But the free world constantly underestimates the power of non-conventional weapon, the weapon of mass construction, the weapon of freedom in the hands of the free world. When we are talking about freedom for everybody, there immediately are three sources of doubts or skepticism, three types of questions with which we are dealing in our book. The first is, who said that freedom is for everybody? Who said that every civilization is capable, wants to live in the conditions of freedom? The second type of questions is, even if it is good for everybody, who said that freedom somewhere is good for our security here? Isn't it better to guarantee our security and our freedom by finding reliable our dictators who will keep for us world stable? And the third type of questions is, even if freedom is good for everybody, and even if freedom is good for our security, who said that the free world has anything to do with this? What, can we really start sending troops all over the world to impose freedom on the other people? It's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. First question, who said that freedom is for everybody? I remember this skepticism. I remember this argument of good people who were coming to us, to Soviet dissidents from the free world, who were coming from Europe and who were coming from Washington, and who were full of love and sympathy to us. And who were saying to Andrei Sakharov, and I had the big honor of, for some period of time, to be his spokesman and was helping to his sometimes secret meetings with foreign officials, how they were telling him, but don't you understand that Russia for 1,000 years, exists 1,000 years, never was a democracy. For a few months, it was democracy, and nothing good happened from this in 1917. It has nothing, the culture of these people, the mentality of these people, has nothing to do with the value of freedom. So isn't it better that we'll simply try to establish good relations with Brezhnev, because this regime is not going to disappear? And then when we'll be friendly, maybe we can help also to specific dissidents. But definitely, we will try to help to your freedom, but definitely not to the freedom of the whole nation which doesn't want this freedom. That was about Russia. I can give you examples of close advisors of Truman, who were in 1945, you are explaining him that freedom is not for Japan. Japan is thousands and thousands of years of civilization, which were all built on hierarchy and discipline. What we Americans, with our 200 years and with our devotion to the Bill of Rights, what we can say to them, how we can teach them, how we can impose this idea of democracy, which is such a Western idea, on this ancient civilization. Of course, we have to find military regime. We have to destroy it. We have to overcome the resistance of it. But to try to impose democracy. And there can be given, and we give these examples in the book, about why democracy is impossible in Japan, why democracy is impossible in Germany, why democracy is impossible in France. Some Americans until now think that it's impossible in France, and in many other countries. So, you see, we can say history is very optimistic. History again and again proves that those who are saying that democracy is not for these people, that people, in the end, are wrong. But it's not enough. And today, when people are saying, but democracy is not for Arab world, and when you read what supporters of civil societies in Arab world write about impossibility of democracy in Arab world, it's very difficult to argue. But I have to say, my optimism is built, and our argument in the book is not built simply on the historical examples. Because always you have to prove that what was right for the past, what was right for Japan, also will be right for Arab countries. You cannot prove it. You have to wait to live for another 20 years, and then we'll see who is right. My proof is built on the experience of the life inside totalitarian regime, and an understanding the mechanics, the dynamics of relations between the regime and the people in this dictatorial regime. And first of all, of course, we have to start from definitions, definitely in such an academical audience. What we mean when we speak about democracy and freedom. My definition comes straight from Soviet prison, when in one cell there were Russian monarchist and Ukrainian nationalist and Pentecostal who was exiled to Siberia, and a Catholic priest from Lithuania, and Muslim Tatars from Crimea who were exiled from there, and Euro-communists. You can't even today imagine that there were communists who were also in prison because they were for communism with human face. And all these people are in one, and of course, I, Jewish activist, who wants to be proud Jew in the Soviet Union or to live for Israel. We all are in one cell, and we all have very different visions, sometimes contradictory vision of the world. But we all agree on one thing. We want to live in the society where people are not punished for their views. What we call town square test in the book. You can go in the center of the town, you can explain, declare about your views, and you will not be punished. You will not go to prison, or will not be punished in one other way. If you will not be punished, it is free society. If it will not be permitted to you, it is fear society. And there is nothing in between. They say, how it can be that there is nothing in between? Can't we imagine a society where dissent is not permitted, but dissent simply is not needed, because everybody agrees? Well, by the way, today we can see here, don't you see that in this country, in that country, all the people agree with the dictator. So they like it. They like this dictatorship. I had to argue it many times in my own government, and not speaking about the leaders of the other countries. Look, it's true that from time to time we can have examples in history of the communities where everybody agrees with the existing ideology. But then look what is happening during the very short period of time. People have different tastes, different education, different mentalities, different ambitions. Children don't want to live exactly as their parents. And then the question whether those who disagree will be permitted to express their disagreement. Look at Israeli kibbutz. When kibbutz started in the beginning of the century, there were people who wanted the same thing, who agreed that their way of life will be exactly like this, like in kibbutz. And it was a very successful experiment, unbelievably successful. No precedent in history. But in one generation, it started changing. Because if you permit dissent, very quickly the society will start changing. If you don't permit dissent, very quickly society will become a fierce society. And then in fierce society, always there emerge three groups of people. True believers, those who from the beginning believe in the ideology of this society. Dissidents, those who dare, in spite of the possible punishment, to express their views. And, as we call them, double thinkers. Those who disagree with the system, with the ideology, with some parts of the ideology, but don't express this disagreement, are afraid. Dissidents, one can say it's a good measure whether the people are capable for living in freedom if they have dissidents. And they say, look, where are dissidents in Arab world? Where are Sakharovs and Gandhis of Arab world? I can tell you where were the dissidents in the 1930s in Soviet Union. How many of dissidents you know from 1930, 1935 in Soviet Union? You don't know these names because they were all killed. And by the way, the West didn't care when they were killed. In 1970, 1965, when the punishment for dissent in Soviet Union was not death, but it was 7 years in prison, or 15 years in prison. And when the West did care, immediately there were hundreds and hundreds of dissidents. So it's always the function of the toughness of the regime and whether the free world cares. So if you say there are no dissidents in the Arab world, check if the free world really cares about the fate of those dissidents. But we'll speak about it in the end. And then, but always dissidents are almost very small tip of the iceberg, very small part of the population, always. The biggest part of the population, the majority of population, are double thinkers. And we put it as the law of entropy, which is always increasing. That's what happens with number of double thinkers in totalitarian regime. It always goes up. And the tougher regime, the quicker this number grows. I was lucky. I know exactly the day, the moment when I became a double thinker. And it's very rare, because people are almost born double thinkers. They live all their life double thinkers. With me, it happened in the age of 5, when Stalin died. And that day, my father, making sure that nobody hears us, and communal apartments, 4 or 5 families in one kitchen. So making sure that nobody hears us, explained to me and my elder brother, who was 7 years old. He explained to me that that is a great day for us, for Jews. Stalin killed millions and millions of people. He was going to exile all of us in the weeks to come to Kazakhstan. But now, probably, because he died, we are saved. And we should remember it's all our life, that the miracle happened. But we should say it to nobody. Nobody should hear it from us. And next day I went to kindergarten, and I was crying with everybody. And I was singing songs about great leader of all the people who gave us this happy childhood, Stalin. And I remembered that that's the happiest day of our life, because the Bacha is dead. That is typical life of double thinker. And with this type of life, you're living until your death. Millions of people remember every moment that there is one thing which you can say publicly, and the real truth which is kept only for your family, for close circles of friends. Millions of people live with constant self-censorship. in constant fear that if you or your children will say something wrong in the school, it can be the end of your career or, God forbid, the end of your freedom. And we give some quotes in our books, in our book, from Iran, from Iraq, from North Korea. And you can see how, with all the big differences, how the experience of doublethink is the same in all these countries. These millions of people constantly living in doublethink, the stage of doublethink, that is the reality of dictatorship. And for external observer, it looks like the country where everybody should think the same. Look at these parades. Look at this expression of loyalty and love to the leader. I remember on CNN I saw the interviews which were made in the center of Baghdad some days before American invasion, when woman was explaining how we all love Saddam Hussein and how we will be ready to sacrifice our lives for Saddam Hussein. And the Western commentator was saying, look, with all the exaggerations, you have to understand that's what these people really feel. And I had these debates in my own government when one of my colleagues was demanding that I will stop calling Arafat corrupt dictator some years ago. And he said, of course he is corrupt dictator, but don't you see how he is loved by his own people? Don't you understand that you're insulting the feelings of all these people? And I had to say, no, Arafat is loved by his own people exactly as Stalin was loved by Russian people. That is a situation of doublethink. And that's something what is not understood, unfortunately, very often. Those who think that in today's Saudi Arabia, it's like kibbutz, meaning that all the people will feel the same loyalty to the ideology and to religion, I can recommend only to go, not read some of the books of dissidents from Saudi Arabia, or go to the airplane from El Riyadh to London, and look how people are in a hurry to change their clothes and how they're changing the way of their behavior, how they're stopping this mind of doublethink. And you'll understand how big is this pressure of doublethink on the people and how they're in a hurry to get rid of it. It is, from my own experience, I can tell you, there is nothing more relieving, more liberating than movement from the life of doublethink to the life of free person. Even if you are in prison, but you start saying what really you think, what really you believe. It's such a great relief. As if you are going on hike with a big burden on your shoulders, and then after many, many miles you can take it off. And suddenly you feel yourself like a bird who can fly. It's so easy to live. So people living for many, many years in this situation of doublethink, they're so used to this constant self-control, self-censorship. They don't realize what a burden is on their shoulders. Only when they stop this life, or because they become a dissident, or because the regime is falling apart, and then millions suddenly live in freedom. Only then they realize what a relief it is. No, I told you that I remember exactly the day when I became a double-thinker. But I also remember how I enjoyed being a free person. During my interrogations in KGB, after my arrest, long after I already became a free person and was speaking what I really think, during my interrogations, I liked, at the time of interrogations, especially when there was more than one interrogator, I liked to tell them anti-Soviet jokes. Instead of answering the question, they ask me some question, they insist on answer, and I say, oh, by the way, what a wonderful joke about Brezhnev I heard. And Brezhnev was a very good target for jokes. And there were hundreds of jokes, all on the underground, of course. And here I don't live the life of underground person. I tell them, you know, after American astronauts went to the moon, Soviet Union was so concerned that they lost in this competition. So Brezhnev calls the cosmonauts and says, we decided we are launching you to the sun. And they say, Leonid Ilyich, how it can be? We will be burnt alive. And he says, well, do you think we are idiots in Politburo? We thought everything. You will go there at night. So That's I'm telling them, and I'm laughing. Like you, I'm laughing, because it's funny. Even if you're telling it for the 10th time, it's funny. Especially if Brezhnev is in every portrait, in every room, and you see this portrait, how he's explaining that he will send them a son. They cannot laugh. The one in the presence of the other, these KGB guys have to be very angry. They start shouting on you. They are exploding from water, but they have to shout and to express their anger. And then you say to me, and you tell me that I am prisoner and that you are free. You cannot permit yourself to laugh when you want to laugh. Why was doing it? First of all, of course, to irritate them. That was my revenge. But mainly, to remind to yourself all the time that now you're free. Not like when Stalin died, that you could not, that you had to cry. And these people, even when they want to laugh, they cannot laugh. It is very important to feel this feeling of liberation. You moved from the world of fear to the world of freedom. You know, there were elections in Iraq just now. What a powerful statement. How many Americans will go to the polling stations if they know they can be killed there? I'm sure that less than 70%. Does it mean that Americans love freedom less than Iraqi people? Of course not. But Iraq people have experience which Americans don't have. Experience of living in awful, torturous, fear society. And when they have an opportunity to increase the chances that they are living fear society, and they will live now in free society, they go do it. That's exactly the power of freedom. The second question, and I know it took me more time than I'm supposed to. The second question. Even if freedom is good for everybody, even if all the people, when given an opportunity to choose between life in freedom and life in fear, will choose to live in freedom, who said that it is good for our security? In our troubling times, with difficult process and many changes, with fundamentalism threatening us from different corners, how we can rely on the elections in any country? Isn't it better to have reliable dictators? As President Johnson once said, excuse me for my English, let's have our sons of the beach. And that's, I have to tell you, that is always, unfortunately, the first choice of democracy, to find your own dictator and to support it. So, to prove that you cannot really rely on dictators, let's go again on the level of micro, on the level of mechanics of dictatorship and democracy, in order to understand why security has to be connected always with democracy. What is the difference between democratic leaders and dictators? First of all, what is in common? They all want to stay at power as long as possible. What is the difference? Democratic leaders depend on their people. So in order to stay at power, they have to deliver to their people, or they at least to have to demonstrate to their people that they're trying to deliver. They have to demonstrate that they're trying to satisfy their needs, their demands. And that is why, for democracy, war is always the last choice. And that's why you will not find one example where two democracies decided to went to fight one another instead of making even the worst possible compromise. Dictators don't depend on their people. Their people depend on them, on the dictators. And but what it means, if dictator wants to stay at power, he has to keep his people under control. And to keep under control millions of double thinkers, it's very difficult. It's a big problem. And they use different tools. They use brainwashing. They use KGB, Secret Service. They use Gulag, punishment. They use many tools. But by far the most powerful tool to keep people under control is to have an external enemy. To mobilize your people, to rally your people against this enemy. They have to invent this enemy all the time. You know, Stalin was genius to invent for 30, 40 years, every day, enemy. He killed already everybody who can be killed. He arrested everybody who can be arrested. But he needs enemies all the time. And he turned all the economical development of Soviet Union into one big battle against the enemies who are trying to destroy our economy. And that's why on trial he was bringing each time ordinary people who were agents of America or France or Japan, who were trying to destroy our factories, our mines, to undermine our economy. It was economical struggle, economical competition with the West was turned into the battle against enemy. And you can find, practically you'll take any dictator and you'll find there is an enemy. Because that is condition of the survival of the dictator. And then I am given, and that's why, by the way, with dictator, you can never have a stable peace. At this moment, he can have some interest to have peace with you. But tomorrow, he can need you as an enemy. People say, and what about Egypt? You in Israel have such a wonderful peace agreement with Egypt. And Egypt is far from being democracy. And these days, we can read a lot about awful violations of human rights in Egypt. You know, it's true that we have a good peace treaty with Egypt. There is no war between us and Egypt. By the way, at the same time, there is no war between us and Syria. And we have no agreement with Syria. So maybe it has something to do also with the strength of our army. But most important, with Egypt, during that, while signing with us agreement, received many things, territory and money and American money, technology, new weapons and so on. But it lost something extremely important. It lost Israel as an enemy, what was the glue of the society in the hands of these dictators. So what happened after this? In the last 20 years, not before, in the last 20 years, Egypt turned into the center of anti-Semitism in the Arab world. More protocols of Elders of Zion were published in Egypt since it signed peace agreement with us than in any other country in the world. The longest serials, TV serials with the most anti-Semitic pictures are produced in Egypt after it signed peace agreement. And I explained it by the fact that when they lost us as a political enemy, they urgently need another enemy. And there is no better enemy than Jews. Take Saudi Arabia. I was asking the leaders of the free world in Washington after 91, when America in Gulf War saved Saudi Arabia. I was asking how it is that the free world, that the United States of America, don't want to make some in smallest linkage between their assistance to Saudi Arabia and some process of democratization. You cannot demand from Saudi Arabia to become democratic, but maybe to link it with the question, for example, of freedom of immigration, at least for those Arabs who are citizens of the United States of America, or something about the rights of women, or something about the rights of oppositional delegations to visit Saudi Arabia. And always the answer was, Saudi Arabia is not about democracy. Saudi Arabia is about stability of the free world. 10 years later, everybody could see what kind of stability it brought. But not always it understood the mechanism of it. There are tribal dictators who have to keep under the control a lot of double thinkers in their own country. And they need an enemy. And that's why they need to support Wahhabism. That's why ideologically, financially, all over the world. The price of stability of regime of Saudi Arabia is non-stability all over the world. That is the lesson. So that's why, as I said many times, and we write in the book, it is better to deal with democracy which hates you than with a dictator who loves you. And now we are going to the third question, a very important one. But even if, let's say, the freedom is universally desired and universally desirable, even if you'll agree that freedom somewhere is good for security everywhere, who said that we, free world, have nothing to do with this? Do you really want us to start imposing democracy on all the countries of the world? It's not enough for us troops in Iraq. Now we'll have troops in North Korea, in Cuba, in many other parts of the world? Of course not. We have to remember that dictatorial regimes can be very dangerous, can be ugly, can be aggressive. But these regimes are very, very, very weak from inside. Why? Because all their energy they're spending on one thing: how to keep millions and millions and millions of double thinkers under the control. And it is a very difficult job. And if they are not helped, they will not succeed to do it for a very long time. Look what happened with the Soviet Union. Yesterday, when I was in the American Senate, it was a special pleasure to me to remind how some of the very respectable senators, some weeks before Soviet Union fell apart, were saying that Soviet system is forever. At the same time, I can quote you Andrei Marik, my friend and the friend of Andrei Sakharov, who in 1969 wrote the book, If the Soviet Union Will Survive Until 1984, where he was predicting the Soviet Union is doomed to failure. And that's exactly what we dissidents were feeling. We saw how weak the system is. The image which Marik shows, he says, imagine the soldier which is keeping the gun directed towards prisoner. And this gun, he has to keep 24 hours a day and night, for years. At some moment, his muscles will be tired. The gun will go down. At that moment, prisoner will escape. So the conclusion is very simple. Stop giving energy support to this dictator. Of course, you cannot impose on other people democracy. Nobody can impose freedom on anybody. But you can impose dictatorship simply by supporting this dictator. So the dictatorial regime needs free world as the enemy in order to keep their own people under control. Dictatorial regime needs free world as a friend to get energy from them. And the trick is how they get it. And again they get it. That was all the trick of detente. Detente, the policy, whatever the architects of detente in the West thought that that's establishing good relations and creating good atmosphere. For Soviet Union, it meant one thing. We need America as an enemy, and we need America as a friend at the same time. We need to be able to support this aggressive communist ideology, to send our troops to Angola, to Eritrea, to advise us to Nicaragua, to Prague, to Afghanistan, and at the same time we need American credits, American technology. We need to convince America to stop competing with us because we cannot compete with them in high-tech and so on. And that was the secret of detente. And just at the time when Soviet leaders thought that they succeeded, just at the time when administration of Nixon was going to sign free trade agreement, came Senator Jackson and said, no, he said, you cannot have both. And he brought a piece of legislation which said, without free movement of people, there will be no free movement of goods. And there was a big debate. On one hand, who we are to dictate Soviet Union, there should be free movement of people. On the other hand, there were those who were saying, why only free movement of people? Let's demand everything. But he established two things. First of all, principle that we are not interested to have a partner, ally, who is not giving freedom to their own people. That for us, it's not important how they treat us. For us, it's important how they treat their own people. But second, in practice, it has to be connected, linked to small steps, which you can demand, which they can fulfill if they understand that they have no choice. And after Jackson Amendment was Helsinki Agreement, where this linkage was much broader. And we dissidents who created Helsinki Group, we knew that we will be arrested. We all went to prison. Andrei, Yuri Orlov, today the professor at Cornell University, and all the founding members of Helsinki Group, including myself, were arrested in 1 year. But we made sure that the world will not be deceived, that there will be clear linkage, and there was clear linkage between all the relations of the free world with the Soviet Union and the question of human rights. And then President Reagan with his evil empire speech, which caused so much embarrassment in the democratic world, how he could who permitted him to call Soviet Union. It's so non-diplomatic. I have to say, it was the happiest day for us in Soviet prison. When in Soviet prison you're not in punishing cell, you're permitted to read newspaper. Pravda, not any other newspaper, the Soviet official newspaper. And I happened not to be in the punishing cell that day. And they brought me Pravda. There was written condemnation of Reagan, who dared to call Soviet Union an evil empire. And with big excitement, we prisoners were knocking more from one cell to the other, talking through toilets. We forgot about all precautions. We were trying to inform one another that the great day had come. Finally, the leader of the free world calls spade a spade, brings moral clarity, makes it clear that we will not be dealing as with equal partners with those who are keeping their people in prison, as long as they are evil empire. That was the turning point. It was clear for us the days of the Soviet Union are numbered. And that's all went in one consequence. Jackson, Helsinki, evil empire. It all meant that the West makes Soviet Union to face a choice. You can have us as the friends, can have us as the enemies, but you cannot have us both. And the real criteria whether we can trust you is not how you treat us, not how you call us, not what kind of summits we have, not what kind of handshakes we have, not what is written in the text. The real test is how you treat your own people. And by the way, when there was the speeches of Bush, there was a debate to whom he is speaking and whether it is right message to his people or not. I would think when I was listening to it, and I was very excited, not only because there were so many quotes from our book, but mainly because I was thinking that that is the message which hear the dissidents in Iran and in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia and in North Korea and in many other parts of the world. And believe me, that makes a lot of difference. By the way, we are in Kennedy School, so I feel I am obliged to say that one of the first who broke this wall between dissidents and the leaders of the free world, and who met personally dissidents openly, the first senator who did it was Edward Kennedy by the West. So that was the lesson of the defeat of the Soviet Union. The lesson which was abandoned by the free world almost immediately after this. And I give examples in the book how Bush's father, immediately after such a great victory, was thinking how not to permit to Ukrainians and Lithuanians to become independent. Why? Because Gorbachev is a guy that we can rely on, and it's better to have less democracy but more stability. And the same can be said about many other parts of the world. Maybe the most sad example, of course, is the Middle East, where the peace process not only was built in 1993, so-called Oslo process, not only it was built without linkage to the question of human rights and democracy, but it was decided in advance that it is good for us, for the free world, for Israel, that Arafat is a dictator. I quote my prime minister, who said a week after handshake in the White House that Yasser Arafat, without restrictions of Supreme Court, human rights organizations, and heart-bleeding liberals, will fight the terrorists of Hamas much better than we can do it. That's when I wrote my first article against Oslo, and then it was very unpopular. It was such an atmosphere of hope. And I wrote that we will do everything to strengthen him as a dictator, and he as a dictator will need us as enemies. He doesn't have any other enemy to keep his own people under control. So everything what we'll give him as a dictator, he will use to strengthen hatred towards us. It's, well, I can give many examples of this false strategy by the free world trying to find dictators who try to bring you peace. Today we are at a different moment, in a cautiously optimistic moment, just now after a new summit, with new leadership in Palestinian Authority. And definitely there are reasons for optimism, but there are also serious reasons to be cautious. Because again, only yesterday, I could see how on this summit, which is so important, it's so good that after the 4 years of terror, of the war of terror, we are talking to one another, how again there was made an attempt to separate the issue of security from the issues of democratic reforms. And I believe that only if this linkage will be very strong, And I was very encouraged by the fact that President Bush declared it as a principle, that it will be very strong. Only if there will be leadership which embraces democratic reforms, we should embrace this leadership, and we should support them. But it also means that if they don't embrace reforms, if they prefer to be dictators and to run their own people as dictators, we should give them no legitimacy. And then, the final line, I know that I crossed all the lines of my time. The final thing, the Soviet Union was defeated when human rights activists and security hawks united their efforts. They understood that they have one enemy. And that's, I believe, is the agenda for today. People who believe in human rights should understand that you cannot separate human rights from the question of free society. And people who are concerned with security should understand that there is no way to separate security from the question of free society. So the struggle for free society is the struggle not between left and right, not between east and west, south and north. That's the struggle for real security in this world. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we may go a little longer than originally thought, so we can have as many questions as we can. I want to thank again Mr. Sharansky for his comments. I'm going to ask, if I might, there are microphones here, but I'm going to ask for the first question from Professor Alan Dershowitz of the law school, who is here.
Great microphone here if you want. It's a great honor to have you at Harvard Law School. We've known each other, Harvard University. We've known each other for so many years, and I'm thrilled to have you here. I want to ask you a question about Iran. You say that the best way of avoiding threats to security is to encourage democracy. There are some who say that with regard to Iran, they push in opposite directions. That is, if the United States and or Israel were to try to take preemptive action to destroy Iran's very dangerous nuclear program, that would set back the cause of democracy. It would unite all the Iranian dissidents under the rubric of the dictators, because the one thing that all Iranians seem to agree about is the necessity of having a nuclear program. So what do you suggest happens when, in a situation like that, the need for immediate security or protection against nuclear weapons may look in a different direction from the need to encourage democracy?
Okay. Well, this question has, first of all, thank you, Alan, for your question. It has many aspects. Let me first say that sometimes, yes, democracy has, I just now was saying that you can defeat dictators without one shot. But sometimes democracy has to fight the dictatorship when it is a threat to our survival. Always, always, if you have to fight, to go to war against dictatorship, it means that there was a long period of appeasement when you were appeasing this dictator, when you didn't see him as a serious threat, when we helped this dictator to become a threat. There was a period of appeasement of Stalin, there was a period of appeasement of Hitler, there was a period of appeasement of Saddam Hussein, there was a period of appeasement of Yasser Arafat, and in the end it finished with the wars. As to Iran, of course, if the regime of Ayatollahs will have nuclear weapons, and this regime doesn't make any secret from the fact that they will use it to destroy, as a minimum, to destroy Israel, but maybe not only Israel. So, of course, if it will be reality, it's clear we'll have no choice. But first of all, let's not forget that for 10 years, I was involved already 9 years in warning by our intelligence of the West about this danger. 9 years ago, we said that in 10 years, Iran will have nuclear weapons, and that Russian technologies and European technologies are leaking there. And I have to say that because of different reasons, we can be critical of Russia, but we should be no less critical about the free world, about the fact that the measures were not taken to stop it. Now, having said all this, there is one good sign. Iran is a classical example how in one generation the country of true believers turned into a country of double thinkers. As my friend, who is now the president of one of the former Soviet republics, told me recently, that when I was in Iran, it looks exactly as the Soviet Union in the last years. I said, what do you mean? He said, the leadership hates America, all the people in the street love America. And it is critical to support dissent, to encourage dissent. I'm sure that this situation is so ripe for the change from inside. Just now, the leaders of opposition are united in the appeal for a referendum. That is the time for the leaders of the free world, including the United States of America, will go ahead and to support directly this call for referendum. That is the time America was spending a lot of money to help to broadcasting on Soviet Union. I know that dissidents of Iran have big problems to get another $1 million to broadcast on Iran. Isn't it ridiculous? We are spending now hundreds of millions of dollars to prepare ourselves for the war. If God forbid we will need their war, and we are not ready to spend some millions to help the dissidents with their work. So there is a lot of things to do, and I believe that even in this last moment, it still can be possible to encourage the change from inside. And let's stop talking about that we cannot impose on people of Iran freedom. We are imposing on them dictatorship of Ayatollahs if we are not helping them.
Thank you. We'll move on now, and I'd ask you, please identify yourself, and please be brief, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sharansky, for your presentation today. I just want to briefly mention a story of when I first heard from you is when you beat Garry Kasparov in this match in simultaneous, and just want to use chess as an analogy of for my question. Is, well, like the knights in the chess game that they jump from white to black, and you mention our war as being black and white between these free societies and these fair societies. We have nowadays like governments that they keep jumping like the knife from the white to the black squares, using this fear that you were pointing to defend their citizens. They use this as an excuse to defend their citizens, where they keep all these liberties at home, but then abroad, they just engage in all these torture, murder, etc. And I just want to hear your opinion about how to deal with these contradictions of the free society, where we keep our liberties, but then we are much more open about violating others' liberties.
Well, first of all, of course, violations of human rights can be also in free societies. And not only can be, they often happen, especially in the situation of the war. And if I understand correctly, you hint on serious violations of human rights which were done by America, for example, in Iraq and maybe some other places. And it should be condemned. But look, the difference. The difference is that when human rights were violated by American troops in Iraq, there were an investigation of the Congress, and there were articles in the press, and there were people who went to prison, and there were people who were fired from the army, and many other things. That is the difference. If these violations were in the army of Iraq, or in the Soviet Union, or in China, we will not even know about it. Forget about any investigations. So it is very important to fight for human rights in the most free society in the world. It's very important not to compromise even a little bit on this. But you should never confuse between societies where human rights can be violated, but can be also defended, and societies where human rights simply don't exist as a principle.
Mikhail Muhamedinov, visiting researcher from the University of Glasgow. Mr. Sharansky, in the current international system, 20% of global population are in possession of 80% of wealth and resources. How do you think in such conditions the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel can enforce democracy internationally, that kind of democracy that would be different, say, from ancient Greek democracy? There, out of 60,000 people, the total population, 55,000 people were slaves and servants. Thank you.
Well, I didn't understand. Well, I understood your concern about the fact that there are so many rich and so few rich and so many poor. I didn't understand how it's connected with the question of democracy. Yeah, I know this feeling that you have first to make people less poor, and then you can talk about democracy. I want to draw your attention that usually when people start living in democracy, they are becoming less poor. It is these totalitarian regimes which are encouraging and strengthening poverty. And it is democracy and freedom which permits people to improve their way of life.
But I'm a citizen of the Russian Federation, and since 1991, you know, all we had was the growth of corruption, poverty, and crime.
Okay,
this
well,
thesis is not confirmed, you know.
Okay, so I have to say, first of all, as a citizen of Russian Federation today, you're not living in the country where there are 5 million people in the prison, where there are 5 or 6 million people working for secret services, and where you're living under the constant fear of arrest, first of all. Second, yes, there is a lot of violations in Russia. And there are much more tools now to fight against it, with much less risk for your life. You're a young person. There are many young persons. Why shouldn't you be involved actively in the struggle for improvement of the station of human rights in Russia? And I think that the free world and the United States of America have to support it. And I hope that on the next summit between Putin and Bush, the questions of human rights again will be on the agenda. But with all this, let's not forget that there is a huge step forward which was made from Russia 20 years ago, which really was one of the most awful totalitarian regimes, and Russia of today, which has the problem of corruption, which has the problem of poverty, which has the problem of crime, but where there are more and more tools to fight with all this.
Yes, Minister Sharansky, thank you very much. My name is Maria Steffen. I'm a fellow here and a student at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I appreciated your comments and your passion for freedom, and I supported your main policy recommendation that the U.S. should not support authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. At the same time, dictatorships are not the only regimes that deny freedom to people. Occupations do the same thing. And I'm thinking specifically of the occupation of the Palestinian territories. And I'm wondering if it follows from the logic of your argument that the United States should withhold aid to Israel until the occupation ends, given that it is the antithesis of freedom. Thanks.
Okay. Israel is occupying territories which belonged before to Egypt and Jordan, which were controlled by Egypt and Jordan, and in which some millions of Palestinians live. Why Israel occupies these territories? Because we had to defend ourselves, because there is a war in which it was declared that we will be thrown into the sea. And that's why we are there. And it's a big problem for democracy. It's definitely we should not, it's not good for us, it's not good for Palestinians that we are controlling their lives. But we have to continue the struggle to defend ourselves. As I was, just some days ago, I showed the clips to the members of my government of the statements of officials of Palestinian Authority about how Israel should be destroyed and shouldn't exist. So I want to give to Palestinians all the rights in the world except the right to destroy me. And what it means that the state which will emerge should be a democratic one and not a terrorist one. And that's why I was saying that I even wrote in the program of my party that the depth of our concessions should be the depth of democratic reforms on the other side. Unfortunately, the principle which was not supported by left and it was not supported by right. It was not supported by left because they said democracy is something which never will be in the Arab countries, and that's why let's not wait, let's have peace first. It was not supported by right because they were saying, what, and if there will be democracy, we must have concessions. I'm glad that finally one person in the world supports this principle, that the depth of concessions should be at the depth of democratic reforms. It happens that this person is the leader of the United States of America. So I do hope that now we have better chance to bring real peace to the Middle East.
Hi, Mr. Sharansky, it's an honor to talk to you tonight. My name is David Prum. I'm a resident of Cambridge. I have to say that your concept of democracy and freedom seems a little simple to me. You're a great hero of this cause in Russia and in the world, but maybe hard cases don't make good analysis. Nobody could argue with the principles that George Bush presented in his inaugural address, but it's kind of like a cheerleader at a chess match. It's kind of vacuous and irrelevant to what's actually happening. Do you think a developed democracy has to pass other tests? For example, your public square test is a great test, but maybe there's a megaphone test. Anybody here in this country can say whatever they want at any time, but 99.9% of them are irrelevant. In a developed democracy, we have to talk about who owns the microphone. And there's also the thin end of the wedge test. We have just... Okay.
Okay.
We've just exported 150 alleged terrorists to foreign countries so that they could be disappeared and tortured and without any due process and without any public knowledge. And President Bush not only has done this, he's also lied to the American people and said it's not happening. What do you think are some of the more sophisticated tests that a developed democracy has to pass?
Well, first of all, about simple tests. I propose very simple tests. And I have to say that the life in the free society is very complicated. It has many shades. It has a lot of competition, a lot of ambition, a lot of interesting things, which makes life interesting. The life in the totalitarian regime is very simple. The life in punishing cell is very simple. Whether you are free in punishing cell or you're a slave even when you are in so-called freedom. And to differ the fair society and free society, you need a very simple test. And if you think it's too primitive, then why, unfortunately, the free world is constantly confusing fair societies and free societies? It means that it lacks simplicity in this. It lacks very simple test which will help to the free world to understand that here is freedom and here is fair society.
No, that's a good test, but are there more sophisticated tests?
As to the free society, look, I'm an Israeli minister. I don't want to go too much in the criticism of your president or your system. But I do know that America, not only Israel, America also looks for me as a democracy. It means that you have all the tools to make sure that the microphone, the hands which keep microphone will be changed from time to time. You can have all the tools that even when some serious crimes are made in the name of American democracy, you are bringing these crimes to the light and people are punished even if they are presidents of the United States of America, not speaking if they are soldiers of the army. That is the difference. And of course, in analyzing democracy, you need many complicated tests, but let's not confuse it with the one very simple and basic truth. It is very different to live in free society or in fair society.
Thank you. Very brief, please. A single question per person.
My name is Michael Lubins. I'm a high school student at Thayer Academy. It was a real honor listening to you speak tonight. My question is, given the UN's large anti-democratic constituency, how does America's relationship with the UN fit into President Bush's stated foreign policy objective of democratization?
Well, about United Nations, we are speaking at the end of our book, and I personally am very skeptical about United Nations because majority of those who are voting in the United Nations are not representing their people. Their people don't vote for them. So their people are not permitted to vote, but these people are permitted to vote about decide about the fate of the world. We have to understand that most of the decisions of the United Nations have nothing to do with the interests of the world. They have to do a lot with the interests of the bunch of dictators who are running these people. That's why I proposed to have in parallel to United Nations, to have the organization where only the leaders of those nations are represented, who permit to their people to elect them. Okay?
Thank you.
My name is Zach Goldman. I'm a senior at Harvard College. The notion of linkage that you've promulgated is sort of based on the idea that there are going to be negative consequences for non-compliance with democratic reform, like you saw in the Soviet Union, the potential with the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. But in some cases, notably Arafat's refusal of the 2000 Camp David Accords, he returned to the West Bank as sort of a conquering hero that stared down America and Israel and won. And in that sense, there were positive effects from a rejection of linkage, and one could postulate that a similar case could prevail with Iran. So what happens when not only is a rejection of linkage not a negative consequence, but is viewed by a subject population as a positive thing? It seems that the leverage that the democratic states have to affect change has then disappeared, and sort of we're left helpless.
Well, I don't know why you decided that Palestinians reacted positively on the rejection of Yasser Arafat. In fact, you know, there are 40% of Palestinians who were optimistic about their future before the death of Arafat, some days before. And some days after, 65% of Palestinians were optimistic about their future. That says more about the attitude of Palestinians towards Arafat than many other things. In that case, what you have to think also what was before the year 2000. Before the year 2000, there were 6 years of appeasing of Yasser Arafat, when the free world, including Israel, decided to give even public money which belonged to Palestinians to put them in private pocket of Yasser Arafat in order to strengthen our dictator. So after such a long period of violating this principle about which I was saying, you can say that, look, suddenly it is good that there is no linkage. I think the linkage between human rights and international policy is always good.
Hi, my name is Rich. I'm from Cambridge, and I'm with the Freedom to Marry Coalition of Massachusetts. I think I know a couple of synonyms for the concept of doublethink. As a gay man, I know the word closet, but I also know the word deception. I'm kind of living in the middle of this culture war, and I heard that George Bush used your concepts in launching his new war on tyranny. What I'm wondering is how to reconcile the cultural repressive climate that we've seen with the rise by what to me seems like blind, uncritical thinking on the right side, catering to the faith of the less sophisticated right wing. And I'm also wondering how we can judge the regime by how it judges its own people when we have a don't ask, don't tell policy, where if I did the same thing as I'm doing now, said, hi, I'm gay, but I were following my father's footsteps in the US Navy, I'd be drummed out and disgraced. I just wanted to hear your comments on whether I should be afraid to live in this country during this time where the left and the right are no longer engaged in serious dialogue. Thank you.
I'm not sure that I understood everything because maybe I'm not reconnected enough to American reality, but I have to say that, again, the concept which I'm talking about, it's not the concept of the struggle between left and right. And if you feel that you're threatened by the right in your own country, well, you have all the tools to fight. And to fight in the way that you will not go to prison. Make sure that in the next elections there will be a president whom you like more. Start campaign now. Start building your front of activity. And if there are restrictions in the Navy, first of all, I want to say that these restrictions don't exist in Israel Army. So maybe you want to go to Israel.
I'm aware of that. I should move.
Try to take 3 more questions quickly, please.
I'm Shira Schoenberg with the Jewish Advocate. Could you please speak for a minute about the 2 recent elections in Iraq and in the Palestinian territories? Do you think that these were free elections, and do you consider these 2 societies to be moving towards true democracies?
Well, first of all, in both cases, something very important happened. In both cases, it were not free democratic elections, because it's not yet free. Free democratic elections can happen only in free democratic society. And in both societies, there is still a lot of fear. But in both cases, it was very important that the new leaders were chosen in election, at the election polls, and not by fighting and shooting and killing one another. Now, in addition to this, of course, in the case of Iraq, and as I said, it was a very powerful message of the people who are moving from fear society to free society. Now, whether the real free elections, it's not the beginning of the process, it's the end of the process, when the free democratic institutions are built already. Whether it will happen or not depends a lot whether now there will be clear policy of encouraging and pushing democratic reforms. When I was asked also by President Bush at our meeting, when he read my book and invited me to discuss it 2 months ago, what I think, what will happen if Abu Mazen come to power, and what I think about Abu Mazen. I told him, no, I can tell you many good things about Abu Mazen. I can tell even more very bad things about Abu Mazen. I believe it doesn't really matter at this moment. What matters if next day after elections, free world will tell to Abu Mazen, we will embrace you and support you only in case if you embrace and support democratic reforms. And by the way, that is the only way that he will follow it, because it's much easier for him to continue the path of dictatorship. It's much easier for him because then he doesn't have to fight many of the enemies. But it is very important for us that he will choose another way. And he will choose it only if he will link all our support and 100% of support of the budget of Palestinian authorities coming from the free world. If you link all this with the question of democratic reforms.
My name's Marty Leibowitz, and I'm from Brookline. I wanted to just take advantage of your presence here and probably follow up on this last point. How, being that Yasser Arafat is out of the equation now, how would you tell the Israeli people, both left and right, to judge whether we should continue with the peace process, and how would you measure whether we're making any progress, true progress? For example, should we expect to hear more dissidents from the PA side now that we have what seems to be a little movement here with democracy?
Well, from my point of view, first of all, you say how we can continue peace process. We don't have anything to continue, because from my point, there was no peace process. Because for me, the progress in peace process is measured not by the percentage of territories which were transferred, and not by the number of terrorists which were arrested, which were released, and not by the number of settlements which were built or which were dismantled. It is measured only by one thing: if Palestinians have more freedom and more liberty and more independence from their own dictators, or less. And unfortunately, from 1993, there was less and less and less freedom. And I'm speaking not my own opinion, opinion of Palestinian dissidents. And with some of them I was meeting only 3 days ago. And they feel that their civil society, which they had, and they were closer to democracy than maybe any other Arab people, that it's all is more and more destroyed and is going backward. So I believe that the success in peace process should be measured by the fact whether Palestinian leadership starts dismantling refugee camps and creating decent conditions for living, whether they give real freedom of economical life and help to middle class to re-emerge, and it was the best middle class in Arab countries. It was Palestinians, and it was totally destroyed. If they stop the culture of hatred in their schools and in TV, if all this is happening, that means that there is real peace process has a chance, and then we have to support all this with our concessions.
My name is Michael Goldman. I'm a freshman at Brandeis University, and I'm a big believer in your vision of universal democracy. How do we, in the free world, ensure not only that new free societies will emerge, but that the existing democracies do not backslide into some kind of dictatorship, as may be happening in Venezuela today?
Well, look, if you notice in the speech of President, he was speaking that we can reach the station where there will be no lasting tyrannies. You can find these words also in my book. So we are speaking about lasting tyrannies, understanding that from time to time there can be tyrannies for a short period of time, even after democratic success. Of course, there can be retreat. But if the reaction of the free world will be appropriate, it will not last for a long time. The problem, for example, there were democratic elections in Germany in 1933, and Hitler came to power. And then less than a year after this, he declared that is the end of democracy. There will be no more democratic elections. We don't need this democratic process. So the reaction of the world was wrong, not at the time when Hitler was elected. There was no way to stop these democratic elections. There was no need to stop these elections. But what happened when Hitler canceled this democracy? Did the free world declare him boycott? Did he become pariah in the eyes of the world? To the contrary, from that very moment, free world started making one concession after the other, hoping to appease him and to turn him into our dictator. So whenever you're speaking about Venezuela or any other part of the world, that has to be the approach. As long as there is democratic improvements, you can enjoy our partnership. The moment you start retreating, it will be finished. And if that will be the approach of the free world, there will be no lasting dictatorships. Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. You got it.
No, it's only in the respect to your haircut I permitted this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Stransky. It's a true honor. I really appreciate this. I think it's particularly relevant to Harvard. There's a bit of a problem at this university and many academic institutions, and I know that you have spoken about this in numerous occasions. The people who call themselves Democrats have become the opponents of democracy. Liberals have opposed liberalism. For some reason, an extreme pluralism or relativism where you can't say that democracy is better than dictatorship, that George Bush and his government are not terrorists like as Al-Qaeda. Unfortunately, you hear these logical statements reversed constantly. So how do you combat that relativism where the left has somehow formed a bizarre alliance with the far right supporting fundamentalism?
Okay, I understand the question. The answer is very short. Exactly for this, you need a very simple town square test. You know, to remind yourself again and again that you're a free society, even if you hate liberals or you hate conservatives and so on. With all these battles, and I hear even here in your question, there is a lot of opposition. Please don't forget that all these differences which divide you are nothing in comparison with what divides us from free society. Thank you, and I have to give the word to the next guy because people don't know, but that is Vladimir Albrecht, who is, by the way, who was the teacher of the whole generation of dissidents. So he was giving us lectures how to behave at the interrogations. And then when people learn... And I have to say that when hundreds of dissidents and Jewish activists were interrogated on my case, in the end, there was a special protocol that they followed the system of Albrecht, and that's why they didn't give any testimony. So.
Я хотел бы задать вопрос по-русски, Натан.
Okay, I'll translate it. Okay.
Не кажется ли тебе, что советская система погибла в результате стремления многих людей, ее даже руководителей, улучшить эту систему? Собственно, это касается, наверное, и любой тирании. Вот такими улучшателями были довольно многие руководители. Этот путь предложил первый Хрущев, завершил его Горбачев. Все они улучшали эту систему. Собственно, этим же путем шли диссиденты. Никто из нас, никто из них не призывал к всеобщим беспорядкам, всеобщему неповиновению, к массовым демонстрациям.
Володя, the question, вопрос.
Думаешь ли ты так же или нет? Что ты об этом думаешь? То есть советская система погибла в результате стремления ее улучшить. И это касается, наверное, других тираний.
Okay, look, he was my teacher, so I have to be respectful to my teacher. And he spent hundreds of hours preparing people for 20, 30, 40 minutes or 2 hours of interrogations, and he was very good in it. Look, now the question which you ask me is almost philosophical. That the totalitarian regimes fell apart because of the desire of the people, not only dissidents, but also the leaders, to improve, to give them a little bit more freedom. I agree with this. There is no such a thing as a little bit more freedom. So when people mistakenly think that by giving a little bit more freedom to the totalitarian regime, they're saving it, they're wrong. That's what helps to destroy this regime. And that's why, by the way, this linkage between help, assistance of the free world, and a little bit more freedom, it works, because in the end the totalitarian regime thinks, okay, I'll give them this small piece of freedom and I'll get all the support of the outer world, and that is the death sentence to this regime. Thank you, Volodya.
Thank you,